In just 79 seconds, inside a small Ohio home with peeling paint and creaking floors, a family's silent suffering would collide with an inexplicable grace that would forever alter the faith of an entire town. What happened to the Thompson family wasn't just about food on a table. It was about an unseen hand moving in the shadows of despair, revealing itself in ways science cannot explain and logic cannot contain. But the question remains, why them? Why in the quiet heartland of America would such an extraordinary event unfold? Stay with us, because the answer will challenge everything you think you know about faith and desperation. If you believe in the power of stories that inspire and uplift, make sure to subscribe and hit that comment button below to share your thoughts on the miracles that hide in plain sight. On the morning of September 18th, 2015, a story began to unfold in the quiet town of Harmony Creek, Ohio, that would forever blur the line between destitution and divine intervention. Harmony Creek wasn't the kind of place people expected headlines to emerge from. A town of barely 5,000 souls, it sat surrounded by rolling fields of soy and corn and long stretches of dusty highway. The town had its routines, its small joys, its Sunday services at St. Jude's Parish. People here believed in hard work, in keeping their struggles private, and in making do with whatever they had. And yet, behind one modest two-bedroom house on Chestnut Street, a family was being pushed to the very edge of survival. Rebecca Thompson, once a bright-eyed bookkeeper with a steady job, now found herself standing in her small kitchen, opening cupboards that were starkly, achingly bare. Her husband, Stephen, a skilled stonemason by trade, had not held a steady paycheck in nearly a year. His workshop, once the pride of his hands where he carved custom fireplaces and garden stones, had been destroyed in a flash flood the winter before. The insurance company had stalled, questioned, and ultimately denied their claim, citing an obscure clause in their policy. The Thompsons had fought back at first, but lawyers cost money they no longer possessed. Their 3 children, Kayla, age 12, Connor, 9, and little Clara, just 4 years old, were too young to grasp the full weight of what their parents were carrying, but not too young to feel the persistent ache in their stomachs. The oldest, Kayla, had begun making excuses at school, claiming she liked wearing the same worn-out jacket every day, even as the sleeves crept up her wrists. Connor had learned to silence his complaints, though at night his parents could hear him whispering that his belly hurt. Clara, with all the blunt honesty of a child, asked again and again when breakfast would be ready, even when there was nothing left to cook. For 3 agonizing days, nothing of substance had passed through that family's mouth. A can of corn, a heel of stale bread, and watered-down broth stretched to seem like soup. That was all that had kept them going. Neighbors noticed the small, almost imperceptible changes. A local cashier of the town's only grocery store remembered Rebecca once buying treats for the kids. Now she bought only the cheapest flour and pasta, if she bought anything at all. Stephen, who once carried himself tall with stone dust on his shirt, was now seen walking the streets, knocking on doors, asking farms and construction sites if they needed an extra pair of hands. He was turned away almost everywhere. And then came the moment that would crack open their private suffering for the world to see. On that September afternoon, Rebecca gathered her 3 children and walked them hand in hand towards St. Jude's Church on Main Street. For years, she had avoided asking for help, determined to weather every storm with dignity and self-reliance. But the hunger in her children's eyes, the vacant look that had replaced their youthful energy, had become an unbearable weight on her soul. Her pride had to yield to something far greater, the desperate, primal instinct of a mother to keep her family alive. Those who saw her that day remembered the image vividly. A woman, pale from worry, her hair tied back hastily, walking with 3 small children who shuffled quietly by her side. Kayla carried Clara's favorite worn teddy bear. Connor clutched his mother's hand, as if afraid she might vanish into thin air. They weren't loud. They weren't crying. But there was something in their profound silence that told of an exhaustion too deep for words. When Rebecca reached the rectory door and rang the bell, Father Patrick, the parish priest, was finishing his afternoon reading. He would later recall that the moment he opened the door, he felt something shift in the air, a heaviness, a palpable sense of sorrow, but also a call to action. He saw the hollow cheeks of the children, the trembling in Rebecca's hands as she tried to form words. And he knew this was no ordinary parish visit. "Father," she said, her voice breaking on the first word, "we haven't eaten in 3 days. My children are hungry. I don't know where else to go." Those words, carried on a whisper, would set in motion a chain of events no one in Harmony Creek could have ever predicted. A family at their lowest point, a mother forced to surrender her pride, and a community about to witness something they would one day call a miracle. Before the hunger set in, the Thompsons were like so many families in small-town America. They lived in a modest 2-bedroom house on Chestnut Street, a home with faded green siding and a backyard just big enough for a swing set and a patch of roses Stephen tried to cultivate every summer. For years, theirs had been a story of quiet stability and understated contentment. Stephen Thompson had built his reputation with his hands. For nearly 15 years, he worked as a stonemason, specializing in intricate stone carvings and historical restorations. His small workshop, converted from an old garage behind their house, had become a hub for neighbors and even clients from larger cities like Columbus. People said he had an old-world touch, the kind of craftsmanship you couldn't find in modern construction. On weekends, you could hear the rhythmic chip of his chisel, the scrape of his trowel, and his apprentices learning to shape limestone and granite under his steady eye. Rebecca, with her sharp mind for numbers, handled the business side. She managed invoices, prepared taxes, and made sure every check from clients was meticulously recorded and deposited on time. More than that, she raised their 3 children with a calm, unwavering steadiness. Kayla, the eldest, inherited her mother's thoughtful, observant eyes. Connor had Stephen's boundless curiosity, always tinkering with scraps of stone in the workshop. Little Clara was the family's heartbeat, the toddler who filled the house with infectious laughter and song. For a long time, their life felt ordinary, secure, and blessedly predictable. But ordinary can unravel with breathtaking speed. It started with a single phone call in late 2014. A commercial developer from Columbus, who owed Stephen's workshop over $50,000 for a large custom stonework project, declared sudden bankruptcy. Overnight, months of intense labor and expensive materials vanished into a vortex of legal paperwork and empty promises. The Thompsons tightened their belts, assuming they would bounce back as they always had. But then January brought disaster. On a bitterly cold night, a torrent of rain caused a nearby creek to overflow its banks, and a flash flood surged through their property. By the time the waters receded, the workshop was a ruin. Every tool, every piece of machinery, was caked in mud and rendered useless. The stone Stephen had stockpiled for years, rare cuts of marble and slate, was swept away or buried under silt. He stood in the mud, his children clinging to Rebecca's coat, and watched his livelihood collapse into a soggy, unrecognizable heap. Insurance adjusters came, took photographs, and filed reports. Weeks passed, then months. The letters came back full of legal jargon and denials. Act of God, insufficient coverage, pre-existing structural vulnerabilities. The claim was delayed, then disputed, then effectively erased. Without his tools and materials, Stephen couldn't take new jobs. By March, he was officially unemployed. Rebecca tried to step in. She polished her resume and sent it to accounting firms in Columbus and even further afield. But she was 38 with a 7-year gap in her employment history from raising children. Rejections filled her inbox. "We've chosen another candidate. Thank you for your application." Each email felt like a door slamming shut in their faces. The savings went fast. Mortgage payments, utilities, groceries. They drained what little cushion the Thompsons had built. By June, bills piled up unopened on the kitchen counter. The electric company sent warnings. The water bill was overdue. They sold their used truck. Then Rebecca's grandmother's locket. Then antique furniture Stephen had once restored himself. Pride kept them from asking for help sooner. They attended Mass quietly every Sunday at St. Jude's, dressed neatly, smiling politely. Few knew that the Thompsons often skipped meals to make sure their kids could eat. Father Patrick, the parish priest, noticed Stephen's gaunt face and Rebecca's worn-out shoes, but when he tried to ask, they brushed him off with polite deflections. By the first week of September, the cupboards were nearly bare. The mortgage company threatened foreclosure. The phone line had been disconnected. On September 16th, Rebecca opened every cabinet, desperate to find something, anything, for dinner. She found a single can of corn, a handful of flour, and a box of herbal tea. That night, she mixed the corn with the flour to make thin, watery pancakes, called it a special recipe, and served it with a forced cheerfulness that didn't fool her children. Kayla noticed her mother's plate was empty. "Mom, you're not eating," she said. Rebecca smiled weakly. "I'm just not hungry." In truth, she was starving, saving her meager share for Stephen, who would come home late again, tired and defeated. By the second week of September, the Thompson household had crossed an invisible, terrifying line, the line between struggling and starving. Hunger was no longer a passing discomfort. It had become the relentless rhythm of their days, the silent, ever-present shadow in every room. On Monday morning, Rebecca opened the refrigerator, hoping against all hope for some forgotten item. The light flicked on, but the shelves stared back at her with nothing more than a jar of pickles, a half-used container of ketchup, and a single, lonely egg. She checked the cupboards next, flour dust in the bottom of a bag, a few tea bags, one can of diced tomatoes, dented and almost forgotten. She lined everything up on the counter like a soldier, taking inventory before a hopeless battle. Kayla, standing quietly by the doorframe, whispered, "Mom, is that all we have?" Rebecca forced a smile that felt like a crack in her face. "It's enough for today," she said, though the gnawing pit in her stomach told her otherwise. That night, she boiled the diced tomatoes with a little flour, turning it into a watery, acidic stew. She ladled small portions into bowls for the children and set them down as if they were part of some cherished family recipe. "Try this," she said brightly. "It's something special." Kayla ate in silence, but her perceptive eyes didn't miss the empty plate in front of her mother. "Mom, you didn't take any," she said softly. Rebecca waved it off with a practiced gesture. "I'm not hungry." But she was. Her body ached for sustenance. Her head felt light. And still she saved her portion for Stephen, who would return later that evening with nothing more than weary apologies and empty hands. Tuesday was worse. Breakfast was hot tea, unsweetened, as the last of the sugar was gone. For lunch, Rebecca found the hardened crust of a loaf buried deep in the freezer. She scraped the last dregs of ketchup from the container, spread it thinly across the frozen bread, and cut the pieces into thirds. Connor ate quickly, then clutched his stomach, his face pale. "It hurts today," he murmured, fighting back tears. Clara, too young to hide her need, sobbed openly. She asked over and over for milk, for crackers, for anything that might fill the painful emptiness inside her. Stephen came home late again, his face lined with the grim exhaustion of another fruitless day. "No work," he admitted, collapsing into a chair at the kitchen table. "They said maybe next week." Maybe. Rebecca wanted to scream. Next week was an eternity away. Next week, her children might not even have the strength to play in the yard. Instead, she put a trembling hand on his shoulder. "We'll make it somehow," she whispered, though she no longer had any idea how that could be possible. That night, after putting the children to bed with promises of a better tomorrow she couldn't guarantee, Rebecca sat on the cold floor of the kitchen and cried quietly into her hands. Pride, that stubborn, foolish pride, had kept her from admitting the truth to anyone. To the neighbors, she smiled and waved. At church, she stood tall, pretending everything was fine. But inside, she was collapsing under the weight of her family's silent suffering. "God," she whispered into the profound silence of the house, "if you can see us, if you can hear me, please help my children." Wednesday morning dawned heavy and humid. The children woke sluggish, their eyes dull, their voices faint. Rebecca gave them cups of hot water, calling it a special breakfast tea, though its only ingredient was despair. Kayla tried to drink hers slowly, pretending to enjoy it, while Connor pushed his cup away, whispering, "It's not food." Then, around 10 o'clock, Connor swayed where he stood in the living room. His knees buckled, and he fell to the floor. Panic surged through Rebecca's chest as she caught him, his small body feeling frighteningly light. "I'm fine," he insisted weakly, "just dizzy." But the truth was stark and unavoidable. 3 days without real nourishment had pushed their small bodies past their limits. Kayla, old enough to ask the questions her parents dreaded, finally broke the suffocating silence. "Mom, why don't we have food anymore? What's going to happen to us? Are we going to die?" Rebecca froze, her throat closing around the words she couldn't say. She pulled her daughter close, her own body trembling, whispering only, "I won't let that happen. I promise." But promises don't fill stomachs. By noon, Rebecca knew she couldn't hide behind her pride any longer. She washed her children's faces, tied Clara's hair into a little ponytail, and told them they were going for a walk. Inside, her heart was breaking into 1,000 pieces. She had never asked anyone for help in her life. She and Stephen had always been the givers, the dependable ones, the ones who brought casseroles to grieving neighbors. But now, her children's hollow eyes and weakened bodies left her no other choice. When she stepped out the front door, neighbors glimpsed her leading 3 small children down Chestnut Street. Most thought nothing of it, just a mother walking her kids on a late summer afternoon. No one knew that inside her purse sat exactly $2.15 in change, all the money left in the house. No one knew that she was heading towards St. Jude's Rectory, ready to say the words that would shatter her pride. "My children haven't eaten in 3 days." Rebecca Thompson had reached the breaking point. What she could not possibly know was that this act of profound humility, the simple, desperate decision to knock on a church door, would not end in humiliation, but in a chain of events that would defy every logical explanation. When Rebecca Thompson reached the old brick rectory of St. Jude's, her hands were trembling so violently she had to clench them into fists. She had walked the 3 blocks from Chestnut Street with her 3 children trailing quietly at her side, each step heavy with humiliation and a deep, gnawing fear. Kayla clutched Clara's teddy bear. Connor dragged his worn shoes along the sidewalk, and Rebecca held their small hands as if they were her last tether to courage in a world that had become hostile and unforgiving. The rectory was not an imposing place, just a simple 2-story house beside the church, its white shutters in need of a fresh coat of paint after years of Ohio weather. Yet to Rebecca, standing at the gate, it felt like an insurmountable wall she was about to break through. She swallowed hard, took a deep breath that did little to calm her racing heart, and rang the bell. Inside, Father Patrick was in his study, surrounded by books on theology and history. At 65, the priest had served Harmony Creek for over 30 years. His hair had gone completely white, his face lined from decades of listening more than speaking. He was known for his thoughtful sermons, his habit of visiting the sick and homebound, and his uncanny ability to notice the suffering that others often overlooked. When the doorbell rang, he rose, slipped on his reading glasses, and shuffled to the entryway. The moment he opened the door, he felt it, a palpable weight in the air, a plea that was screamed in silence. There stood Rebecca, pale and gaunt, her lips pressed into a tight line, her 3 children clinging closely to her sides. He didn't need words. Their hollow, shadowed faces told the entire story. "Father," she began, her voice cracking with the effort, "we haven't eaten in 3 days. My children are hungry. I don't know where else to go." The words hung in the humid afternoon air like a confession, shattering the quiet sanctity of the rectory. Father Patrick stepped aside immediately, his expression shifting from surprise to deep compassion. "Come in, my dear. Bring the children." He led them into his modest living room, furnished with worn armchairs and a large crucifix on the wall. The children sat on the edge of the couch, wide-eyed and silent, taking in their strange new surroundings. The priest disappeared into his kitchen and returned moments later with a tray bearing a pitcher of milk, a plate of saltine crackers, and a jar of peanut butter. "Here, little ones, eat first." Kayla hesitated at first, her gaze flicking to her mother for permission, but Father Patrick urged her with a gentle nod. Within minutes, the children were devouring the simple food with a hunger that was painful to watch. Connor's small hand shook as he scooped peanut butter onto crackers. Clara clutched her cup of milk like it was a priceless treasure. Even Kayla, who tried to maintain her composure, couldn't hide the profound relief on her face. Rebecca sat quietly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Watching her children eat, she felt a complex mixture of overwhelming gratitude and crushing shame, as if she had failed them in the most fundamental way. Father Patrick noticed and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." Asking for help is not a weakness. It is an act of profound love. Bit by bit, Rebecca told him everything. The unpaid invoices, the flood that destroyed the workshop, the insurance company's callous refusal, Stephen's endless and fruitless search for work. She spoke of the bills piling up on the counter, of selling her grandmother's locket, of the terrifyingly empty cupboards. Her voice cracked when she admitted, "I thought I could protect them from this, but I can't anymore." Father Patrick listened without interruption, his eyes kind but grave. He had heard many confessions in his lifetime, but this was different. This was not about sin. This was about survival. When Rebecca finished, he leaned forward. "Rebecca, you and your children are not alone. The parish has a small emergency fund. It is meant for exactly these situations." He walked to a small wooden cabinet, opened a drawer, and pulled out a plain white envelope. Inside was $250 in cash, collected from parishioners for those in dire need. He pressed it into Rebecca's hands. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "Father, I can't." "Yes, you can," he interrupted gently. "This is not charity in the sense of pity. This is community. This is what we are here for. Even Jesus accepted food and shelter from his friends. Take it and use it to feed your children tonight." Her fingers closed around the envelope. It felt heavier than money. It felt like a lifeline. But Father Patrick knew that $250 would not solve everything. "I will call around," he said firmly. "There may be someone who needs a skilled stonemason. And if not, we will find other ways. What matters now is that your family has food on the table." Rebecca could hardly speak. "How can I ever thank you?" "By keeping faith," the priest replied simply. "By remembering that even in the darkest of times, God sees you. He does not forget his children." When Rebecca left the rectory that afternoon, her 3 children walked beside her, their bellies no longer aching, their faces a little brighter. In her hand, she held the envelope, though she still couldn't quite believe it was real. She had walked through that door, trembling with shame. She walked out carrying something else entirely, the first fragile flicker of hope. Late that afternoon, Rebecca Thompson walked into the Kroger on the edge of Harmony Creek with her 3 children at her side. She gripped the envelope Father Patrick had pressed into her hand as if it were made of spun gold. $250, more money than she had seen in months, felt both like an incredible abundance and like a fragile rope keeping them from falling deeper into the abyss of despair. The sliding glass doors whooshed open, and a wave of cool, air-conditioned air swept over them. For Kayla, Connor, and little Clara, stepping into the store was like stepping into another world. The bright fluorescent lights, the neatly stacked shelves, the endless rows of colorful packages, it was overwhelming. They hadn't been in a proper grocery store for weeks, and now their wide eyes darted from one aisle to another as if they had been transported into a dream. Rebecca had prepared a list carefully at home. Bread, milk, rice, pasta, canned goods, fresh fruit, and vegetables. Nothing extra, no luxuries, just enough to stretch for a week, maybe longer if she was careful. She clutched the list like a compass, determined not to wander from her mission. Still, the children couldn't help themselves. "Mom, can we get yogurt?" Connor whispered hopefully. Kayla pointed to a pyramid of shiny red apples in the produce section. "These look so good." And Clara, tugging at her mother's sleeve, whispered with all the urgency of a 4-year-old, "Cookies, Mama. Please, cookies." Rebecca's heart ached. For weeks, she had denied them every small joy, every simple pleasure. She nodded once, a small, decisive movement. "We'll see, but only if we can afford it." They moved aisle by aisle, filling the cart with the basics. A gallon of milk, a large bag of rice, several boxes of pasta, a jar of peanut butter, frozen vegetables. Rebecca compared prices meticulously, choosing generic brands, checking the running total in her head with every item she placed in the cart. By the time they reached the checkout line, the cart was modest but full. Bread, eggs, cereal, some chicken thighs, apples, and a few small treats she couldn't resist. At the register, Rebecca's chest tightened. She had been adding the numbers in her mind, her bookkeeper's brain working on autopilot. The total would be close to $210, maybe a little more. That would leave just a few dollars for emergencies. She pulled the crisp bills from the envelope and smoothed them nervously on the counter. The cashier, A kind-faced woman named Susan, who had seen the family before, began scanning the items. "How are you all doing today?" she asked, smiling warmly at the kids. "We're okay," Rebecca said softly, though her eyes betrayed the tension she felt. The scanner beeped rhythmically, item after item. Rebecca's pulse quickened as the total on the screen climbed. $52.18, $91.45, $143.77. Her breath caught in her throat when it passed $180. Finally, the screen flashed the final number, $212.83. Rebecca's stomach dropped. She had been right. It was nearly the whole envelope. She exhaled shakily, ready to hand over the money. But then something strange happened. The cashier frowned, tapping the screen with her finger. "That's odd," she muttered to herself. "The register is now showing $79.38. Rebecca blinked, confused. "Excuse me." Susan shook her head, looking puzzled. "Must be a glitch. Let me scan it all again for you." She cleared the screen and rescanned every single item carefully, her hands moving slower this time. Again, the total popped up on the screen, $79.38. "I don't understand," Susan whispered, her brow furrowed. "This machine has worked perfectly for years." She tried a third time, even more deliberately, as if willing the number to change. The result was the same. Finally, Susan looked at Rebecca with wide, bewildered eyes. "Well, I can't charge you more than what the register says. It's $79.38 today." Rebecca's hands trembled as she handed over the cash. She almost couldn't breathe. She walked away with her children and her receipt, the cart full of groceries, and over $170 still safely tucked in her envelope. But the miracle wasn't over. When she began unloading the bags in her car, Rebecca noticed items she was absolutely certain she hadn't picked up: a bottle of olive oil, a large package of shredded cheddar cheese, a family-sized bar of chocolate, even several jars of the organic baby food Clara had loved, but they hadn't been able to afford in months. Her first instinct was panic. Had one of the children slipped things into the cart? "Kayla, Connor, did you put these in here?" They shook their heads, their expressions innocent. Clara stared wide-eyed, clutching her new box of cookies. Rebecca emptied every single bag onto the trunk of the car. The truth was undeniable. There were at least $60 worth of extra food items, and she had no memory whatsoever of putting them in the cart. She sat down hard on the curb outside the store, the Ohio sun lowering behind her, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Her children gathered around, tugging at the grocery bags, delighted by the sudden, inexplicable abundance. For Rebecca, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Was this just a series of bizarre coincidences, a computer error, or was it something else entirely? That Wednesday night, the Thompson home was alive with sounds I hadn't known in months. Laughter, the clinking of glasses, the excited chatter of children too busy eating to complain. The kitchen table, usually bare and foreboding, was now filled with plates of pasta with chicken, a fresh salad, and warm bread. For the first time in days, the family ate until their stomachs were full and content. When dinner ended, Stephen gave Connor a piggyback ride down the hall. Kayla helped her mother wash dishes, humming a tune from the radio, and little Clara sang to her teddy bear. The house, so long heavy with a suffocating silence, seemed to breathe again, its rooms filled with a lightness that felt foreign and wonderful. But when the children were finally tucked into bed, their bellies full and their dreams likely sweet, and the dishes were set to dry, a profound quiet returned. Stephen and Rebecca sat together in the small living room, side by side on a sagging couch that had seen better days. A single lamp lit the space, casting a soft, warm glow over the worn carpet and the shelves lined with old family photos. Outside, the Ohio night was thick with the chirping of crickets. Inside, they talked in hushed, reverent voices. $79. Stephen repeated for what must have been the fourth time, shaking his head in disbelief. "I just can't wrap my mind around it. There's no way that machine made the exact same mistake 3 times in a row." Rebecca folded her hands in her lap, her gaze distant. "And the food we didn't even buy. The baby food jars, the good olive oil, the chocolate. Stephen, how can that possibly be explained?" He leaned back, his body still weary, but his eyes softened when they met hers. Maybe it's just luck. A once-in-a-lifetime glitch. Rebecca hesitated, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Or maybe it's something more. The words hung between them, unspoken but deeply felt. Then, at precisely 9:15 p.m., something shifted in the room. First, it was the air. A sudden, inexplicable coolness swept through the living room, though no windows were open and the September night was mild. The lamp beside them flickered once, twice, and then came the fragrance, sweet, pervasive, and unmistakable, like thousands of roses blooming in the dead of spring. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. Stephen sat up straight, his senses on high alert. "Do you smell that?" she asked, her voice trembling. Before he could answer, a light began to shimmer in the corner near the bookshelf. At first, it was faint, like the glow of moonlight passing through water, but it grew steadily brighter and softer at the same time, filling the room with a gentle luminescence that didn't blind their eyes. Stephen instinctively gripped Rebecca's hand, his knuckles white. The light shifted, coalesced, and slowly took the shape of a figure. A woman stood before them, radiant yet gentle, clothed in a flowing white robe with a mantle the color of twilight sky. Her hair was a warm chestnut brown, her face serene, and her eyes luminous with a tenderness that seemed to pierce their very souls. Her hands were joined in prayer, and from her whole being emanated a soft glow that warmed the room with an almost tangible peace. Rebecca's knees gave way. She slid from the couch to the carpet, trembling uncontrollably. Stephen dropped beside her, unable to move or look away, his skepticism melting away in the face of the impossible. Then the woman spoke, and her voice was not a sound that entered their ears, but music that resonated deep within their hearts. "Do not be afraid, my children. I am Mary, the mother of Jesus, and your mother in faith." Rebecca gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. Tears streamed down her face, hot and cleansing. Stephen, usually so steady and unflappable, shook like a boy. Mary's gaze swept over them with infinite compassion. "I have heard your prayers. I have seen your suffering. I was with you when you had nothing to feed your children, and I was with you when the bread appeared on your table tonight. You are not abandoned." Rebecca sobbed openly, words tumbling out in a rush of awe and disbelief. "Was it you at the store? The groceries? The receipt?" Mary smiled with a radiance that filled every corner of the room. A mother does not ignore her children when they cry out. What you received was but a small sign, proof that heaven sees you, and more is yet to come. Stephen bowed his head, tears falling freely onto the worn carpet. "But why us? We are nobody, just a family in Ohio." Mary's answer was gentle and profound. "It is in the ordinary homes, in the smallest of towns, that God's love is often revealed most powerfully. You held on to each other when everything else was stripped away. You chose love over pride. That is why heaven has come to you." Her words wrapped around them like a warm blanket, chasing away the chill of years of hardship. The vision lasted for what felt like an eternity in a single moment. When the light finally faded and the fragrance of roses began to dissipate, Sarah and David remained kneeling on the floor, their hands clasped, their souls overwhelmed by the sacred encounter. The morning after the apparition, Rebecca woke with a strange and profound calm. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, she hadn't spent the night twisting in a state of anxiety, worrying about bills or the lack of food. The scent of roses still lingered faintly in the air, a sweet, ethereal reminder that clung to the curtains and the old carpet. At first, she wondered if it had all been a vivid, desperate dream, but when she walked into the kitchen, her doubts were shattered. The pantry door, which she distinctly remembered closing the night before, stood slightly ajar. Inside, shelves that had been half empty were now full. Cans of vegetables were lined up in neat, orderly rows, alongside boxes of cereal, a large bag of flour, and several packages of chicken, sealed and fresh as if they had just come from a store. Rebecca's knees nearly buckled under the weight of this new, inexplicable miracle. She called for Stephen, and together they stared in silent awe at the abundance that hadn't been there just hours earlier. "Rebecca," Stephen whispered, his voice thick with emotion, We didn't buy any of this. She reached out and touched the bag of flour, the smooth, cool cans, the fresh loaf of bread, as though they might disappear if she blinked. No, she answered softly. We didn't, but someone else did. That day, when the children came into the kitchen for breakfast, their eyes lit up as if Christmas had arrived in September. Kayla grabbed an apple, biting into it with tears welling in her eyes. Connor shouted with pure joy, "We have food again." Little Clara clapped her hands, pointing to a box of her favorite cookies on the counter. And the miracles didn't stop there. On Thursday, Stephen left early to knock on doors once more, searching for any kind of work. But this time, something was different. He carried with him the memory of Mary's words, "Your hands will build again." Instead of the familiar dread, he felt a quiet, unshakable confidence. He stopped at Callahan Construction, a company that had turned him down months earlier. To his astonishment, the owner, Mr. Callahan, greeted him with a broad smile. "Thompson, you came at the perfect time," the man said. "I just signed a contract to restore the old stone courthouse. I need someone who knows historical masonry. The job starts Monday. It's 6 months of steady pay." Stephen could hardly speak. He shook the man's hand with trembling fingers, knowing in his heart that this was no coincidence. Meanwhile, back at home, Rebecca discovered more small but significant surprises. She opened the refrigerator to find several jars of the organic baby food she hadn't purchased. A container of premium hot cocoa mix sat on the counter, though she had never placed it there. Even the laundry basket seemed to have been touched by this strange grace. Clothes that had been worn and frayed suddenly appeared patched and mended, as if lovingly repaired by an unseen hand. Friday afternoon, Kayla came home from school carrying a brand new backpack stuffed with supplies, pencils, notebooks, markers, everything on her back-to-school list. "A lady gave it to me," she explained, her eyes wide with wonder. "She said her name was Mary and that she wanted me to be ready for class." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. There was no one named Mary on the school staff or among the regular parent volunteers that anyone knew of. That same evening, Connor burst into the house with a wide, triumphant grin. "Look what I found on my desk," he exclaimed. He held up a stack of books, the exact titles on his summer reading list. And inside the cover of one was a note written in delicate, golden ink. "For Connor, with love, Mary." The most startling moment came from little Clara. At dinner that night, she looked up from her plate of chicken and vegetables and said in her matter-of-fact 4-year-old way, "Mama, the pretty lady came to my room last night. She told me she loves us. She smelled like flowers." Rebecca and Stephen exchanged a glance, their hearts pounding in their chests. Clara had described the vision exactly, though they had told her nothing about their experience. By Saturday, the entire family was transformed. The children played with a renewed energy, no longer weighed down by the constant gnawing of hunger. Stephen, once worn down by failure and rejection, carried himself taller, ready and eager to work again. Rebecca felt a joy she hadn't known in years, a deep and abiding peace, though tears still came easily whenever she thought about all they had lived through. But the miracles weren't just for them. Neighbors began to notice the profound change. Mrs. Sullivan from across the street remarked, "Rebecca, you look different, dear. It's like you're glowing." At church, Father Patrick saw the family sitting in their usual pew with a sense of peace that radiated outward, touching those around them. He nodded knowingly from the altar, though he said nothing. That weekend, as the family gathered for a simple but plentiful dinner, Rebecca folded her hands and whispered grace aloud. The children joined in, their voices small but strong. "Thank you, Lord," she prayed, "for reminding us that we are never alone." The food, the job, the school supplies, these could all be dismissed as a series of fortunate coincidences by outsiders. But for the Thompsons, each moment was a confirmation, a piece of irrefutable proof. Proof that what they had seen in their living room was real. Proof that the mother who had appeared to them was still near, watching, providing, and guiding them. By the time Sunday arrived, word had quietly begun to spread around the small town of Harmony Creek. People noticed things they couldn't easily ignore. The Thompson children, once pale and withdrawn, now arrived at Mass with bright eyes and brand new school supplies. Stephen, who had spent months walking the streets in a silent stupor of despair, now carried himself with a renewed strength, speaking to neighbors again with a confidence they hadn't seen since before the devastating flood. And Rebecca, her face once etched with the deep lines of exhaustion and worry, seemed almost luminous, her smile genuine and full of light. That Sunday was September 21st, and the gospel reading was about the loaves and the fishes. St. Jude's Church was filled with parishioners, the familiar smell of polished wood and candle wax lingering in the air. Father Patrick stood at the altar and spoke with an unusual and passionate fervor. Mary, the mother of Jesus, does not forget her children in their time of need, he declared, his voice resonating through the nave. She walks with us in our struggles. She bends low to hear our cries. As he preached, Rebecca sat in the pew with her children, her heart pounding in her chest, every word seeming to be aimed directly at her family. When she glanced sideways, she noticed heads turning. People were watching her, watching them, with a mixture of curiosity and something else, something akin to wonder. After Mass, the crowd spilled out onto the church lawn, exchanging the usual greetings and pleasantries. But then something different happened. Mrs. Sullivan, a retired schoolteacher, approached Rebecca, her expression earnest. "Honey," she said gently, "I don't know why, but for 3 nights in a row, I've dreamed of a beautiful lady dressed in blue. In my dream," she kept saying, "help Rebecca's family." She then pressed a sealed envelope into Rebecca's hands. Inside was $500 in cash. Rebecca nearly dropped it, tears flooding her eyes. Others followed. A retired stonemason offered Stephen his old set of tools, polished and ready for use. "I've been keeping these in my garage for years," he said. "Don't know why, but I feel like you're meant to have them now." Another woman, Mrs. Carter, leaned down to Rebecca. "If you ever need someone to watch the kids while you work, just call me. I can't explain it, but I feel like God is nudging me to help." One by one, townspeople approached, some shyly, some boldly, all with the same strange and compelling sense of urgency. They had experienced vivid dreams, sudden stirrings in their hearts, whispers in their prayers, all compelling them to reach out to the Thompson family. By the time Rebecca and Stephen walked their children home, they carried more than just groceries and tools. They carried the weight of a community that had been suddenly and miraculously mobilized around them. That afternoon, the Thompson home was busier than it had been in years. Neighbors dropped off casseroles and bags of fresh produce from their gardens. A local farmer offered to supply them with fresh eggs each week. One young couple even left a gift card to the local hardware store on their porch without a note. It was as though 1,000 invisible hands were weaving together a safety net to catch them. And yet, the strangest and most profound moments still came in private. That night, as Rebecca tucked Claire into bed, the little girl whispered, "Mommy, the pretty lady told me we're safe now." She kissed my forehead. Rebecca froze, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and reverence. Clara's eyes sparkled with an innocent, unshakable certainty. Meanwhile, Kayla confided in her mother. "I think I saw her too. Yesterday, when I was doing my homework, I smelled roses and I felt, I don't know, like someone was standing right behind me, watching over me." Connor, usually the quiet and reserved one, surprised everyone at dinner by saying, "I'm not scared anymore. I think she's watching over all of us." The children's words spread quickly among relatives, neighbors, and schoolmates. Soon, whispers traveled through the town like wildfire. The Thompsons have seen something holy. Not everyone believed, of course. Some dismissed it as mass hysteria, exaggeration, or the delusions of a family under extreme stress. But others, especially those who had also felt strange nudges, experienced vivid dreams, or caught the inexplicable scent of roses, began to wonder. By midweek, Father Patrick's phone began ringing constantly with calls from his parishioners. "Father, I had the same dream." "Father, I smelled roses in my kitchen last night." "Father, is it possible?" The priest, cautious but deeply moved, advised everyone the same. "Pray, stay close to Christ, and if Mary is truly among us, the fruits of her presence will reveal it." For the Thompsons, the fruits were undeniable. Each day brought new provisions, new kindnesses, new confirmations of the grace they had received. Rebecca no longer worried about the next meal. Stephen prepared to start his new job, his toolbox already full. The children returned to school with everything they needed, their heads held high. And perhaps most powerful of all, the town itself began to change. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years began offering help to one another. Strained families started showing up at church again. Acts of generosity multiplied like sparks from a single, divine flame. It was early Sunday morning, September 24th, when the Thompson family was awakened by something extraordinary. At first, Rebecca thought it was a dream. The fragrance of roses was so strong, so pervasive, it seemed to seep through the very walls of their small house. But then Stephen stirred beside her, sniffed the air, and whispered, "Do you smell that?" Moments later, the scent spread through every corner of the house, sweet, powerful, and unmistakable. The children came padding into the living room, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and recognition. "Mom," Kayla whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It's her. She's here again." They gathered in the living room, just as they had a few nights earlier, their hearts pounding in unison. And once more, the very air in the room shifted. The light began softly, almost like dawn pressing through the curtains an hour early. Then it grew bright and golden, filling the room with a warmth that soothed every lingering fear in their hearts. And then she was there. Mary stood before them again, radiant in white with her mantle of celestial blue. Her face glowed with the same profound tenderness that had undone them before. But this time, she did not remain distant. She moved closer, her steps as silent as breath, until she stood among them like a mother among her cherished children. "My beloved children," she said, her voice like music that resonated deep within their souls. "You have endured your trial with faith. You have placed love before pride. For this, you are blessed." She placed her hand gently on Stephen's shoulder. He trembled as though a current of pure, healing energy ran through his veins. "Stephen," she said, her voice both gentle and firm, "your hands will build again, not only for your family, but for others. Through your craft, you will restore dignity to those who have lost it. One day, you will teach the young and the broken, giving them hope through the work of their hands." Tears blurred Stephen's vision. He whispered, "I don't deserve this." Mary smiled, her gaze steady and full of grace. "Grace is never deserved, my son. It is given." Then she turned to Rebecca, who was already on her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Rebecca, your courage as a mother has carried your family through the valley of despair. Your faith will become a light for other women. You will gather families in need, help them rise from their suffering, and remind them that no one is ever abandoned by God. You will be a mother not only to your children, but to many." Rebecca sobbed openly, shaking her head in disbelief. "How could I possibly do that? I have nothing." "You have everything," Mary answered softly. "You have love, and love, when offered freely, multiplies." Then, bending low, Mary touched the heads of the three children. Kayla gasped softly. Connor stared in wide-eyed wonder, and little Clara giggled as though she were being tickled by sunlight. "Kayla," Mary said, her voice full of warmth, "your heart for others will lead you to walk beside the hurting. You will grow into a woman who gives strength to the weak. Connor, you will one day ease the suffering of many through healing hands. The compassion born in your hunger will guide your path. And Clara, my little one, your joy will remind all who meet you that God's love is near, even in the darkest of hours." The children stared, not fully understanding the words, but sensing the profound weight and love behind them. Finally, Mary's gaze encompassed them all. "What you have received, do not keep for yourselves. Share it. Tell your story. Let others know that heaven is not distant, that God's love is alive and active in the world. This house will be a testimony, and your lives a witness. Many will find hope because of you." Her words wrapped around them like fire and light, imprinting themselves on their hearts forever. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was Clara whispering, "Don't go." Her small fingers reached out toward the shining mantle. Mary bent low and kissed the child's forehead. Then she straightened, raising her hands in a final blessing. "I will always be near. When you doubt, remember the roses. When you despair, remember this night." Slowly, the light began to fade. The golden glow receded, leaving the ordinary living room once more. But no longer felt ordinary. The fragrance of roses lingered, clinging to the air long after the vision was gone. The Thompsons remained kneeling in silence, their hearts overwhelmed, their tears flowing freely. Stephen finally broke the stillness. She gave us a mission. Rebecca gripped his hand, her voice trembling but firm. Then we will do it. Whatever it costs, we will do it. And in that sacred moment, the family understood. What had begun as a desperate struggle for survival was now a divine calling. They were no longer just a family rescued from the brink of hunger. They had become witnesses, chosen to carry a message of hope far beyond the quiet borders of Harmony Creek. 5 years later, the little house on Chestnut Street looked nothing like the place it once was. The faded green siding had been repaired and repainted. The yard was trimmed neatly, and a sense of vibrant life often spilled from the open windows. What had once been a place of silent hunger and quiet despair had become a beacon of hope in Harmony Creek and far beyond. Stephen Thompson stood in the backyard where his old workshop had been washed away by the flood. In its place now rose a large, modern wooden structure, buzzing with the sounds of saws and sanders. It wasn't just a shop anymore. It was a training center. Young men and women, some who had dropped out of high school, others who had struggled with addiction or long-term unemployment, gathered there each week to learn the ancient craft of stonemasonry. Under Stephen's patient guidance, they restored antique statues, built custom fireplaces, and even crafted cornerstones for new churches in nearby towns. "This place gave me my life back," one young trainee admitted to a local reporter, his voice thick with emotion. "Mr. Thompson didn't just teach me how to use a chisel. He taught me that I still had worth." The center, officially called the Cornerstone Workshop, had become a model for vocational training across the Midwest. And Stephen, once a man brought to his knees by loss, now carried himself with a quiet, compassionate authority. His reputation as a master craftsman was matched only by his role as a dedicated mentor. Inside the house, Rebecca was just as busy. After the apparitions, she had vowed to live out the calling Mary had given her. She started small, hosting neighborhood families in her living room, sharing meals and listening to their struggles. But the work grew quickly and organically. Donations arrived unsolicited, volunteers stepped in to help, and soon, an official nonprofit was born, the Chestnut Project. What began with a few bags of groceries and a listening ear now served hundreds of families across Ohio every year. They provided food, financial counseling, tutoring for children, and support groups for struggling parents. Rebecca was often invited to speak at conferences, both Catholic and interfaith, to share her story of resilience, faith, and the power of community. She always began her talks the same way. 5 years ago, I was a mother with nothing in my cupboards but desperation. Today, I am here to tell you that God never abandons his children. The Thompson children had grown, each walking the path that Mary had seemingly foretold. Kayla, now 17, had chosen to study social work in college. "I want to help families the way people helped us," she told her guidance counselor with conviction. She volunteered every summer at her mother's nonprofit, mentoring younger kids who faced the same shame she had once hidden behind worn-out clothes and excuses. Connor, at 15, carried books on biology and human anatomy everywhere he went. His dream was to go to medical school. "I want to be a doctor," he said simply, "so no one has to feel helpless when their body is in pain." His deep compassion, born in those agonizing days of hunger, was shaping him into a natural healer. And little Clara, no longer so little, was 9, a whirlwind of energy and infectious joy. Her teachers often commented on her radiant kindness, the intuitive way she comforted children who felt left out or sad. More than once, she startled her parents with childlike but profoundly insightful words. "Mama, the lady still comes sometimes. Not where you can see her, but I can feel her near." The story of the Thompsons, once whispered in the pews of St. Jude's, was now told in churches, schools, and living rooms across America. It was no longer just about one family's survival. It had become a living testimony, proof that even in the darkest nights, heaven still breaks through. And the fragrance of roses? Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Neighbors swore they could still smell it drifting across Chestnut Street, carried on the gentle Ohio wind. And so the Thompsons' journey reminds us of something timeless. That miracles are not locked away in ancient stories, but still unfold today in quiet towns, in ordinary homes, and in the lives of those who dare to keep faith when everything else seems lost. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that hope is never far and that God's love is always nearer than we think. We invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel so that more souls can hear stories of faith, hope, and the miracles that continue to shine even in the darkest of times. Together, let's keep spreading the light.